Welcome to the Marketing Impact Podcast with your host, Mike Wood from Legalmorning.com, providing tips and the latest trends in the world of marketing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wood from Legalmorning.com, and today we're going to take on a very special topic, very close to me, which is Wikipedia marketing. One of the main things you have to worry about when it comes to Wikipedia marketing is notability. If you've ever been on Wikipedia or attempted to create an article, I'm sure that somebody has pointed out notability to you. Now, notability is 90% of Wikipedia. It is the basic threshold that you need to meet in order to be able to create a page on Wikipedia. Now, when I say 90%, I mean if you want to create a page on a specific topic and that topic is not notable, then you can't create it. I mean, you can create the page and post it, but I guarantee you the article will be deleted. If you are able to show notability of an article, you're 90% of the way there. The remainder is going to be the writing, the coding, the formatting, which in itself is very, very difficult as well, but notability is the number one thing that you have to worry about. So I want to jump right in here and talk a little bit about notability. And when I talk about it, notability doesn't mean that you're not I don't want to say notable in the real world. Notability is Wikipedia's definition of notability. So I've seen certain people, companies who are notable in their own right in real life. However, they just don't meet the threshold of Wikipedia notability. And I've seen the opposite, where some people you wouldn't think that they would qualify for a Wikipedia page, but because they meet the basic notability guidelines, they're up and running on Wikipedia. So in order to qualify for general notability guidelines, the basic rule of thumb is that you have to have significant coverage in reliable sources that are independent of the topic. Now, that's basically a three-pronged test that you need to keep in mind. Number one is the significant coverage. Number two is the reliable sources. And number three is the independence of the topic. Now, significant coverage is basically exactly what it means. It needs to be significant as opposed to just being a brief mention or a quick quote. For instance, I have clients that come to me and say, hey, I need a Wikipedia page. You can find me featured in Forbes and Wall Street Journal and New York Times. And sure enough, I find them in those publications, which are great publications, great for notability. However, they're not featured. They're quoted. It may be an article on financing, and they have a one sentence quote about tax rates or interest rates. So that's not necessarily featured. So significant coverage needs to be in depth. The article needs to be about the topic. A good way to judge this is the name of the topic is in the title. So, if it's a featured article about a person, more than likely that person's name is going to be in the title of the article. Now, significant also means more than one. There's no specific rule about needing, one reference or two references or 10 references that are that can be used for notability. Basically, the way it reads, you just need more than one. So a minimum of two, but that doesn't necessarily mean that two is going to get you there. I've seen some that are kept with two sources. I've seen some deleted that have had 5, 6, or 7 sources that I personally would consider notable in meeting these guidelines here. So when we talk about significant, make sure that the topic is talked about in depth in more than one source. So again, forget the brief mentions, forget the quotes. It needs to be significant. Now, reliable sources it's a little bit more tricky, but you can kind of learn from Wikipedia what the reliable sources are. They have a couple different locations you can go to, and I'll include these on the outline of the podcast. Number one is they have an actual page that talks about reliable sources, how to judge them, how to see if a source would be considered reliable or not. They also have what's called a reliable source notice board. So if you're unsure if a topic meets the guidelines for being a reliable source, you can always go to this page and name the source and tell them what you want it used for, and you'll get peer feedback letting you know whether or not the community thinks it's a reliable source or not. So some reliable sources right off the bat: New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Entrepreneur, Forbes. Things you need to stay away from are blogs. And when I say blogs, I don't mean Forbes blog. That's generally notable depending on the author, because Forbes has fact checkers, which we'll get into here in just a second. When I'm talking about blogs, I'm talking about Blogger or WordPress, where the domains are, www.whatever.wordpress.com. Those are personal blogs. They're self-published. They're not considered reliable. Now, reliability of a source all comes down to fact-checking. Does the source, apply fact-checkers to the articles that are written? Now, I wrote an article a little while back for Content Marketing Institute. Now, if you're into marketing, I'm telling you, you have to follow Content Marketing Institute. It's a great publication, has tons of information on marketing. Now, when I first submitted an article there, I thought it was going to be, rather quickly. They'll look at it, they'll review it, they'll come back and tell me yes or no. Now, this article went through 3 rounds of fact checking. It went through 3 rounds of fact checking, and each round they came back to me and said, "Hey, Mike, can you verify this for us? It just, we see what you say in one paragraph compared to another paragraph. Can you clarify this?" So they employ fact checkers, and they go through 3 rounds just to make sure that the content that they're putting out to the people reading their publication is factual. Now, to me, that means Content Marketing Institute is a very reliable source. This is the same type of fact-checking that is done by publications such as New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and that's why they are considered a reliable source. Now, if you just submit a publication, or you're allowed to hit the publish button without submitting it to any type of review, that necessarily isn't a fact-checking type publication. Now, I don't want to say that a publication where you can publish your own work isn't necessarily reliable, because I know people who can publish their own articles for HuffPost and a few other publications. But again, that also comes down to the author. If you're looking at a blog published by, and I don't want to give an example of a blog, let's say you see an article on a site that you wouldn't think would be necessarily notable, but the author is, say, Neil Patel or Jay Baer, and these are authors who are considered reliable because of the many publications that they've done, because of their following, because of the information they've published, because of other publications fact-checking their work before publishing it. So you would also look for the author. Is this author widely published, or is it unknown? Another thing to look at is look at the author's name. If it's on a website and there's no author name, it's generally not going to be considered as reliable as an article that is published with an author's full bio. So with that in mind, again, I'll put the links up on the website for you, but reliable sources are what you're going to need. Now, the final thing is, it's pretty simple. Some people look over it, but it's very important, but at the same time very simple, and that is the reference must be independent of the topic. Now, independent basically means that it cannot be associated with the topic. A press release is associated with the topic. It comes directly from the source. For instance, if I put out a press release about legalmorning.com and it goes to PR Web, then that is not considered a reliable source. If it was, or I'm sorry, it's not considered independent. If it was, I would be able to say I'm the President of the United States, put it out on PR Web, and then use that as the reference to create a nice Wikipedia article about me being president. So independence also applies to things such as your official website. You can't just create a website, put up information, and have it considered towards notability. Now, a little bit about references on notability and non-notability. There's two ways you can use references in a Wikipedia article. The first is to establish notability, and that's what we just discussed. Now, don't get that confused for being able to use a reference for other parts of Wikipedia. For instance, if there's an article, let's just take Barack Obama's article. Obviously, he's established notability as the president. There's plenty of in-depth coverages about him. But there's also some publications that may be a brief mention. That's what we covered earlier as far as significant coverage. Now, that brief mention can still be used as a reference. It can be used to support specific content within an article. However, it can't be used towards notability, towards establishing notability. So when you look at a Wikipedia article, you'll see many sources. Some meet the three-pronged test. It's significant coverage, it's in a reliable source, and it's independent of the topic. So while that goes to supporting content in the article, it's also considered a major point for establishing notability in the article. You may see the next 10 references that are brief mentions and quotes, and you're going to say, hey, Mike, we listened to the podcast and you're completely wrong because this has 10 references with brief mentions. That's fine. You can have those references to support specific stuff within the content. It just cannot be used for notability purposes. You can also sparingly use information that comes from non-independent sources. For instance, company websites are put in the information boxes and external links. Let's say number of employees. A company puts, they have 400 employees. Well, who's the best person to know that other than the company? So, you use that reference from the company website, which is generally acceptable. What you're not going to be able to do is use that to establish notability. For instance, if you want to claim a company is notable because they've received numerous awards, don't use the about page of the company website, which lists the awards. You're going to need to list specific news coverage in magazines or websites that name the company along with the awards, and it's going to be the best source to use. Now, speaking of best source, there is a policy in Wikipedia that is called the best source policy, which means if there's two sources, you need to use the best source. So if you get down to the company website saying that there's 400 employees, and then you have a Forbes article saying that there's 400 employees, then Wikipedia is going to require you to use the Forbes article. So just a few more notes about notability. What we went over here is general notability guidelines. With Wikipedia, there are tons and tons of guidelines for different topics. And when it comes to notability, it's one of the most, convoluted, in-depth type guideline out there. In addition to the general notability that we just went over right here, there's also subcategories of notability. If you're a musician, then you have specific guidelines for musicians. If you're writing about a book, there's specific guidelines that qualify for a book. Biographies of living people have different guidelines in addition to the general notability guidelines. So if you see something, if you're evaluating a specific topic and you're like, wow, I just don't think they meet the general notability guidelines, you can always go to the subtopic of the specific guideline and see if it qualifies under that type of criteria. So again, I'll give you the links here at the on the website for the podcast. And if you have any questions, you can always email me. I usually respond within 24 hours. Other than that, that is the basic general notability guidelines. Now, there's also a guide that I've put together for you, which is on notability. Basically covers everything that we just discussed here today, and you can also find that on the website. I'll include that link as well. So, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Marketing Impact Podcast. For a copy of the information from this podcast, please go to Legalmorning.com and click the podcast tab. Until next time.